Good morning, online learners. I have my crew here with me. Today we will be reading chapter 7 in our book, Wish. By the time I got home, it was getting dark. Gus's old rattle trap of a car was in the driveway, and the smell of spaghetti sauce drifted through the screen door. My feet felt like cinder blocks as I made my way across the yard towards the house. More than anything, I wanted to just go on back to my room and pretend like the day had never happened. But I didn't. I put one cinder block foot in front of the other until I was on the back porch, where Gus and Bertha sat gazingly out in the mountainside view. "Hey," I said, and my voice sounded like a sniveling baby. I kept my eyes on the leaf-covered floorboards of the porch. "Hey there," Gus said. I couldn't look at Bertha, but her silence smacked me hard. I sat down and studied the fading hearts and stars I'd drawn on my arm. From somewhere way down in the woods, a bullfrog croaked, sending his deep-throated call echoing out into the cool evening air. I counted to 3 in my head, and then I said it. "I'm sorry, Bertha." Then I did what I told myself I most definitely would not do. I cried. And I swear I could not stop no matter how much I wanted to. The worst part was that I'd get myself to tell Bertha those things I'd practiced in my head. Like how I didn't mean to holler at her. How I don't hate this house, perched up on the mountainside with Pegasus up there shining over the porch. How those canning jars don't bother me one little bit. And most of all, how I love Cinderella. Because really, who doesn't? But all I did was cry. And then Bertha was kneeling in front of me with her warm hand on my ink-stained arm. "You are a blessing in this house, Charlie," she said. "A blessing?" I said. She should have called me mean and hateful and dumb and sorry, but she called me a blessing. Then Gus stood up and said the perfect Gus thing. "Let's have some of that blackberry cobbler before supper, shall we?" So that's what we did. The 3 of us sat on the porch as the stars were beginning to twinkle up in the Carolina sky and ate blackberry cobbler before supper. And while Bertha told us about how her friend Racine backed out her car into a flagpole at the post office that afternoon, and then just drove off like nothing had ever happened, an acorn dropped from the branches of an oak tree hanging over the porch and fell right at my feet. I nearly spilled my cobbler when I jumped up and grabbed it. I had almost let the day slip by without making my wish. And now, here came an acorn, like it was dropped right down from heaven. I hesitated, but then I went on and did what I had to do. I turned in a circle 3 times, clutching that acorn tight and making my wish. Then I went back to my room and set the acorn on the windowsill. I wouldn't leave it there for 3 days to make sure my wish would be even stronger. That's what my Girl Scout leader in Rowley told me about acorn wishes. And that it couldn't be a lie because Girl Scout leaders, they don't lie. After supper, we had more blackberry cobbler. Gus went to the garden to make sure the sprinkler was turned off, and Bertha said, "Stay right here, Charlie. I want to show you something." She went into her room and came back with a tattered shoebox. She took the lid off and said, "Look." I peeked inside. Photographs. Bertha rummaged through them and took them out one by one. She smiled at it and handed it to me. "Your mama and me," she said, pointing at the hand written on the back. "Bertha and Carla," in the big printed letters. I took the faded photograph from her. 2 young girls sat at the hood of the car with their arms at each other. "Which one's Mama?" I asked. Bertha pointed to the smaller girl. I squinted down at her. She was missing her 2 front teeth and had a Band-Aid on her elbow. I could not take my eyes off of that girl. I imagined her getting down from that car and skipping in circles. I imagined her swinging with her big sister Bertha in the back seat of their daddy's car. I imagined her telling knock-knock jokes and roller skating and eating ice cream on her porch at night. When had this gap-toothed little girl turned into that sad woman in the dark bedroom in Rowley? Did y'all ever love each other? I asked Bertha. We sure did. Then she showed me some more photographs. Mama opened a present beside a Christmas tree. The two of them playing with a puppy in the snow. Bertha pulling Mama in a wagon on a dirt road. Why don't y'all see each other anymore? I asked. Bertha let out a big sigh and shook her head. We grew up, she said. When you grow up, sometimes life gets complicated. That wasn't a very good answer, but I could tell it was the only one I was going to get. So I just said, oh, okay. When Gus came back in from the garden, we went out onto the porch. They held hands while Bertha told us about some old man selling moldy strawberries from the back of a truck out on Highway 14. Then she said, you can call Jackie tomorrow if you want to, Charlie. No thanks, I said. It was so quiet I could hear Bertha breathing. I could feel her looking at me, but I stared out at the treetops. Charlie, she said, don't be mad at Jackie. I'm not mad at Jackie, I said, but that was a lie, like the dark clouds settling over us. I was mad at Jackie. She acted like she didn't have one single trouble hanging on her line, and she didn't care one bit about me. Then we sat there in silence, breathing in the cool night air and listening to the crickets under the porch. That night, when I went to bed, I laid there in the dark and pictured a clothesline full of somebody else's troubles. I knew for sure there was a lot of them I'd rather pluck off of that line than mine. I imagined what other troubles might be. There was probably be toothaches and failed math tests, lost cats and ugly hair, cheating boyfriends and broken down cars. But none of those could hold a candle to my troubles, weighing down on that clothesline like a sack full of bricks. I tiptoed to the window and stared out at the night, thinking maybe I'd see a falling star to wish on. The moon was bright over the mountains and sent a shimmering glow across the yard, making shadows that snaked around the dogwood trees and crept along the garden fence. I knew Wishbone was out there somewhere, all by himself. I wondered what he was doing. Eating stale bread out of someone's garbage? Trotting along the highway in the moonlight? Sleeping under somebody's porch? I hoped Gus wasn't right about Wishbone wanting to be a stray. But then I remembered how he had wagged his tail at me that day. He liked me, I was sure of it. And he was all mine, and didn't have to be a stray anymore. I bet he would love me. I clasped my hands together like I was praying and whispered into the darkness, please come back, Wishbone. Chapter 8. On Saturday, Howard was going to help me look for Wishbone, but first I had to go shopping with Bertha. I hadn't been to Asherville in ages, she said, getting behind the wheel of Gus's old car. It started with a rumble, sending puffs of black smoke drifting out in the tailpipe and floating over the yard. As we wound our way into the mountains and onto the highway, Bertha chatted nonstop. She told me about the time she and Gus went camping, and a baby bear got into their cooler and stole all their hot dogs. Can you believe that? She said. A bear eating my hot dogs. She talked about how much she hated snakes and how when a tiny brown gator snake got into the house, once she stayed with her friend Jolene for nearly a week until Gus swore on the Bible that it was gone. As she could hardly stop laughing long enough to tell me about the time some guy named Arthur Kruger got drunk and lost his false teeth at the church picnic. I don't even want to think about where those teeth would turn up, she said, wiping her eyes. I didn't eat any more potato salad after that, that's for sure. Finally, I figured I'd have to interrupt her, so I did. But what about you and Mama? I asked. What do you mean? She said. Tell me something about y'all.
You.
Oh well, let's see now. I waited, watching her face, seeing her searching for just the right thing to tell me. When I was about 10, she said, so let's see, Carla would have been about 7. We spent the whole summer making yarn bracelets to sell, so we could buy fish for an aquarium our uncle gave us. Yarn bracelets? I wondered how come Mama never showed me how to make yarn bracelets. Then Bertha went on, this mean boy who lived across the street from us threw every one of those bracelets up in the hickory nut tree in our front yard, way up in the branches so we couldn't get them down. She shook her head. Isn't that so mean? What'd y'all do? Well, that's why I'm telling you this story, 'cause it's just so like Carla, she said. She stomped over to that boy and bit him on the hand so hard he hollered like she'd cut off his hand with a butcher knife. Then he ran home crying while she hollered cuss words at him. Bertha chuckled. That girl had some kind of temper, she said. A temper? Maybe I didn't get my temper from Scrappy after all. Maybe I got my temper from Mama. I hesitated, but then I decided to just go for it. How come y'all stopped seeing each other? I asked, hoping maybe this time she'd give me a better answer than she had before. Bertha stared at the road ahead. Well, you know, when you get to be teenagers, you are so busy with this and that and the other thing. And then she dropped out of high school, and then the next thing I know, she was hightailing it to Rowley. But how come y'all never see each other now? I said. Bertha pressed her lips together and shot me a look out of the corner of her eye. It's kind of complicated, Charlie, she said. There it was again, another not so very good answer. So we drove in silence until we got to Asherville. At the mall, I couldn't help but think about Jackie. She and I used to spend all day at the mall, wandering from store to store, trying on crop tops and mini skirts that we were never allowed to have. Picking out earrings we would buy if our ears were pierced. Spritzing fancy perfumes on each other like the samples at the cosmetic counter. Let's go to Sears and look for a Sunday school dress, Bertha said. So we shopped all morning, and by the time we headed back to Colby, I had 2 new dresses and a lavender cardigan sweater. Bertha thought one of those dresses might be too short for church, but she bought it anyway. When we got home, Howard was sitting in a lawn chair by the garden watching Gus do some repairs to the fence. Hey there, Bertha called. Howard walked up with his up-down walk over to the car as I was getting out my shopping bags. Hey, he said to Bertha. Then he turned to me and said, I drew a map. What for? To help us look for Wishbone. He took a piece of folded up notebook paper out of his pocket to show me. I figured we could mark the places we look and it will help us keep track. I shrugged. Okay. Bertha reached for the shopping bags. I'll take those inside, she said. Then me and Howard headed off towards the road, peering into tangled shrubs and squinting into the dark woods along the way. Howard thought we should check the path where we had seen him yesterday. I bet he hangs out there a lot, he said. Maybe. I pushed some tall weeds aside and jumped over the shallow ditch and ran along the edge of the road. But Gus said he's liable to be anywhere, I added. We looked and looked and looked, climbing over fallen trees and pushing through prickly vines. But after a while, we were hot and tired and hadn't seen a single sign of Wishbone. So Howard wiped out his map and stubby pencil and marked the places we had looked, and he decided to call it a day. The next day, I marched into Sunday school in my new dress and plopped right down next to Audrey. And I said, hey, but she acted like I was invisible. I guess she forgot I was part of the church family. First, we had to play that Bible detective game again, and Howard added to his collection of Bible bucks. I couldn't get over all the stuff he knew about the Bible. What was Moses' brother's name? How many times a day did ravens bring food to Elijah? Audrey waved her hands and almost as much as Howard did, jangling her bracelets and going, I know, I know. After that, Mrs. Mackley told us we were going to decorate the bulletin board in the fellowship hall, and it would be called our Garden of Blessings. We'll be making a garden of flowers to show our many blessings, she said. Then she explained that we would make construction paper flowers and write one of our many blessings on each of the flowers. I confess I wasn't too clear exactly what that meant, but I followed everybody else's and got colored paper and glue and scissors. I worked real slow, hoping I could see what somebody else was doing.